Several years ago, I screwed together a bunch of 2x4s and managed to build my son this loft bed for his room, where he'd sleep up top and all of his toys were down below. At first, he loved it, but then he started to complain about getting overheated at night and not being able to feel the ceiling fan. So to solve this, we just moved all of his toys to the top and then put his bed down below. This solved the overheating problem, but then he started hitting his head on the loft while he was getting in and out. I suggested that he start ducking to resolve the issue, but his solution was to move his bed yet again. Currently, he's been sleeping in the middle of the floor for the last 2 months, and since I'm such a good dad, I've done nothing about it. But this has gone on long enough, and it's about time I get my act together and build him a better bed. So, this is what I came up with: the ultimate bed. In true Fisher's shop style, I'm making this thing as complex as I can. It's got a bookcase and cubbies that double as stairs at the foot of the bed, 6 dresser drawers that will have full extension drawer slides, an integrated hamper for his dirty clothes, a removable panel with seasonal storage behind the dresser, and a cool headboard that'll light up with LEDs. This will be my biggest build ever, and we have a lot to cover, so I'll be moving pretty fast. Hang on tight because here we go. I started off by hooking up the trailer and hauling home a small forest worth of 2x4s and plywood. Once I got things unstrapped, I had the exciting job of unloading and then lugging each one around the house, through the basement slider and into the shop. The 1/2-inch sheets were easy enough, but when I got to the 3/4-inch sheets, I had to use a regular old tie-down strap to make it easier. I hooked the ends over the bottom edge and then just put the strap over my shoulder. This worked well, but I was absolutely exhausted by the time I finished the last one. I should have eaten my Wheaties. Now to break these down, I started by putting down a foam insulation board on my work surface. This supports the cut, but also allows the saw blade to cut all the way through the sheet without damaging anything underneath. I printed out the cut list diagrams I made, and from those I started to lay out my measurements onto the sheets. To make this easy, I'm using my Kreg AccuCut track saw. It comes with a sled that can accommodate just about any circular saw and just attaches with some set screws. The track has a lip on the bottom, so you just plop it down on the sheet and slide it up to the edge. Line up the track with your marks and then cut away. It's really that simple and makes breaking down large sheet goods super fast and easy. In fact, the zero clearance on the track left a real crisp edge that was just as good, if not better, than what I get on my table saw. Once I broke things down a bit using the track saw, I could switch over to using a miter saw to finish cutting some of the pieces, and then use the table saw to rip down the rest. I wrote a touching haiku poem on each piece, and once I was done with that, all the pieces were ready. Now that the pieces are cut out, we're ready for some pocket holes. I'll be using my Kreg K5 master system to make it easy. I just fasten the jig to a scrap board and then clamp it down to my bench, hook up the dust collection, adjust for the thickness of material, and get to drilling. The dust collection is some of the best I've ever seen on a jig, and the lever-activated clamp makes it super easy and fast to move the material for your next pocket hole. Even my 8-year-old son was having fun using the jig. The first thing I start to assemble are the dresser drawer sides. I use some Kreg corner clamps to hold the pieces square, and then use the right angle clamps to squeeze the pieces in tight while I drive in the first screw. Then, as I add screws, I can remove the clamps in turn. It didn't take too long before I'd finished all 6 drawers. Now since these drawers won't see much abuse, I chose to just use glue and brad nails to hold on the bottoms. And with a 1/2-inch plywood not truly being a 1/2 inch, the bottom had a small overhang, which is good in my opinion, because I can go around each drawer with a flush trim bit in my router and make it perfect. Now this is the first of what will be many glue-ups in the project. I'm pretty sure I single-handedly kept Titebond in business for another year with the amount of glue I use. This lamination is going to be one of the inner walls of the dresser. When it came time to drill the pocket holes for the back of the dresser, the panel was too big for me to put it up on the bench. So Kreg makes another jig that will hold the pocket hole jig, so you can clamp it right onto the edge of the larger piece. It's a jig within a jig. It's like jig inception. It's jigception. With all that ready, I could prop it up and then fasten the back of the dresser down. And then again with the first side. I can't tell you just how easy your assembly is using these Kreg clamps. They're definitely a must if you're using pocket holes for anything. Then I used 1/2-inch spacers and my drawers to find just the right placement for the dividers. Next, I started assembly on the built-in hamper. It went together pretty much the same as the drawers did. However, when it came to putting on the surface, I didn't want any nail holes to show, so instead I opted to just glue and clamp it. And once it was dry, I could flush up the edges with my trim router. Now Kreg also makes this blue triangular thingy that, when you clamp it, holds your drawer slides perfectly square so you can just fasten them in. These drawers were just a little too heavy to use the Kreg jig to mount the rail, so I elected to just do it the old-fashioned way. I drew a reference line and then drove the mounting screws into it once I spotted it through the holes. With all the drawer slides in place, I could then fasten on the top. When it came time to make the drawer pull cutouts on the faces, I wanted to make them all very clean and consistent. So I flexed my brain muscle and I came up with this thing. It fits over the edge of each drawer face and allows me to trace where the cutout needs to be. Then I can take that over to the bandsaw and cut it out, but I stay way inside the line. Then I put the jig back down over the cut, clamp it in place, and flip the whole thing over. Now I can just use the jig as a reference template with my router and get a perfect cutout. With a little bit of sanding, the cutouts are flawless. Being sure to shuffle first, I dealt out some playing cards and used them to space out the drawer faces before I clamped them on. Then from the inside, I could measure and drill a couple mounting holes where I could drive in some screws to fasten on the drawer face. And the next step called for a beam compass that I didn't have, so I just grabbed some scrap and quickly made one that would fit the bill. And now that I'm done with it, I'll sell it to you for just $400. Cash. Free shipping. I draw on the opening for the hamper and then use a Forstner bit to punch a hole for my jigsaw. With the opening cut out and cleaned up, I could round over the edge with the trim router. I rounded over the ends of a couple dowels on the disc sander. And then those got glued and tapped into place to dry. And this wraps up the dresser. The next piece to build was the bookcase stairs. I start by drilling out all the pocket holes and getting each piece ready to assemble. Each of these 3 boxes that make up the bookcase were glued and screwed together. Now a couple of the pocket holes were visible on the inside, so I used Kreg's maple plugs to fill the holes and then I sanded it flush. After finish, it'll be as if the hole was never there. Flushed up all the edges and then the boxes were done. To mount them on the bottom, I traced each box location and then drilled a pilot hole through the top, flipped the piece, countersunk all the holes, and then I could glue and screw in the boxes from the underside. Next step was adding shelves. I'd slide in each shelf, get it to exactly where I wanted it, and then trace the edges. I'd drill through and countersink from the other side, but once I added glue to the shelf, my inner percussionist came out. Allow me to play you the song of my people. With that out of the way, I could fasten it in. I screwed the first step onto the bottom, and once that was secure, I could tip things up on end and glue and screw on the second one. Now, I know it seems that there's an abundance of unsightly pocket holes throughout this bookcase, but I assure you, the way I designed it, it hides every single one in the finished product. You'll see. Now, the last step for the bookcase is to attach, well, the last step. I squared on a whole bunch more glue, making sure to get the bottom edges of the box as well. I clamp it in place, and then drive the screws up from underneath to fasten it in tight. And then the bookcase part is complete. Next part was to make the storage area frame. There's not much to this section actually. There's quite a few repeatable cuts to make, so I set up a stop block and then just cut out all those pieces. To be honest, the frame pretty much put itself together. Okay, so I did have to screw it together, but with Kreg's 90-degree clamp, it sure makes it easy. Once the frame was together, I could lift it up in place, add a couple more cross braces, and then it was complete. Now I could drop in the storage area cover. I wanted to cut in a handhold so you can easily lift up the panel, so I used some complex mathematical formulas to calculate and devise the optimal location that would offer the least wind resistance during the lifting procedure. And there you go. The last bit was the headboard. I first measured and drew the rectangular section that needed to be removed. Then, using my jigsaw, I stayed inside the line and roughly cut it out. Then I built a framework of scrap wood around it that would act as fences for my router, and then I just went around the whole thing using a straight bit to give me a perfectly smooth edge with rounded corners. The next step was to put on the main uprights. Since I didn't want to have nail holes showing in the front, I decided to only use glue, so I skimmed on a coat and then clamped each upright on to dry. The same story goes for the top brace as well for the lower. Notice that the lower brace is just about 1 inch short of reaching all the way across. You'll see why in a minute. If you're an employee over at Titebond, you can thank me for helping pay off your kids' college tuition with the amount of glue that I used in this project. Speaking of which, here I am gluing on the sides of the headboard. The last little bit to go on is the very top of the headboard. Now, I can finally give my glue bottle a break. Now, around the inside of the headboard, I screwed in some clips that will hold an LED rope light. With 2 of these ropes connected together, I was able to go around 3 times, which turned out to be just right. The power cord goes through that little gap in the lower brace, and then I could drop on the back cover, drilled some pilot holes, and fastened it to the framework. And I figured I'd give it a quick test. I screwed in a tiny conductive metal plate that I ran a wire to. The other end of the wire then gets plugged into a sensor switch along with the LED rope light. When it's all plugged into the wall, this little metal plate becomes a touch-sensitive switch to operate the lights. Now for a finish, we wanted to go dark, but to still show off the grain. My wife settled on a stain color called Briar Smoke from Varathane. I'd brush it on and almost immediately wipe it off. If I left it on too long, the color would just be a bit too dark to make out the grain. After staining came poly. I put on 3 coats of water-based satin poly and lightly sanded at 220 between each one. And now, just like in my son's Power Rangers show, it's time for all these individual modules to come together and form one massive one, hopefully with less lasers, fire, and cheesy choreography. So to do this, I just use carriage bolts and then trim them to size. And with that, we're done. Check this thing out. How awesome is this? I really like how you can see the continuous grain on the drawer faces and just how flush everything is. These cubbies work great for his shoes, and the stairs are super sturdy. The grain on the headboard is amazing, and it looks so good when it's lit up. Accessing the storage area is as easy as just sliding his mattress over and lifting up the panel. And the integrated hamper has been wonderful, as well as really helps to keep his room clean. All in all, a successful project, I'd say. If you'd like to build it for yourself, I'll have the plans available on my website. Thanks to Kreg for sponsoring the build, and thank you for sticking around and watching it. Take care, and I'll see you next time. Crap! I hit the edge. Felt this moving. Yep, it was moving. Doggone it. I gotta clamp that harder. I'm gonna try this again. Oh crap, I lost this one. Holy crapskis. Oh, this completely came off. I'm not recording, am I? Oh, I am. Dang it! Oh, oh, stubbed my toe. Yikes. Wow. Hey! You turned off my light. What are you doing?
Hammering.
You're doing good.